You know, sometimes you have to eat a little shit to earn a seat at the table. This pro bono case, this is my spoonful of shit. My name is Alex Riley, and the partners at Sterling and Locke in Chicago see me as a sharp, hungry associate, the kind of guy who bills 200 hours a week and sleeps with his laptop. They're not wrong. I've clawed my way out of a dead-end town to get here, and I'll do whatever it takes to make partner before I'm 30. So, when old man Sterling mentioned a character-building opportunity, I just smiled and said, "Point me to it, sir." The character-building opportunity turned out to be a pathetic land dispute in my hometown, Harmony Creek, a place I hadn't set foot in for 15 years, a place I'd spent every waking moment trying to forget. But it was a test, a loyalty test. Who's willing to drive 6 hours into the middle of nowhere to argue over a fence line for a firm that won't make a dime? I am, that's who. So I packed a suit, my laptop, and a bottle of bourbon and drove back into the past. The town hadn't changed, not one bit. The welcome sign still had the same peeling paint, the same cheerful slogan, Harmony Creek, a nice place to live. It was a lie then, and it's a lie now. The houses sagged a little more, the silence was heavier. It wasn't a peaceful quiet, it was the quiet of a place that's given up. Driving down Main Street, I saw faces I recognized, older and more worn, sitting on porches, watching my city car with slow, curious eyes. I felt their gazes on my back, a familiar weight I thought I'd shaken off for good. This whole town felt like a damn tomb. My client was a man named Peterson. The file described him as elderly and insistent. That was putting it mildly. He lived in a small, cluttered house at the very edge of town, the kind of place that smelled like dust and old soup. He opened the door a crack, peered at me through thick glasses, and grunted, "You the lawyer?" "Alex Riley," I said, offering a hand he didn't take, "from Sterling and Locke." "Figured. You look like you cost too much." He shuffled back inside, leaving me to follow. The air was thick with the ticking of a grandfather clock. He was exactly what I expected, a grumpy old bastard fighting over a few feet of dirt. We sat at his kitchen table, which was covered in yellowed papers. "It's my land," he started, his voice a gravelly rumble. "Been in my family for 100 years. Now this new fella from the city buys the adjacent plot and says the fence is 3 yards on his property. 3 yards!" He slammed a shaky fist on the table, rattling a salt shaker. "I've reviewed the preliminary surveys, Mr. Peterson," I said, all business. "There seems to be some ambiguity in the original deeds. We'll just need to—" "It's the principle of the thing," he cut me off. "That fence marks the edge of my property, right up against Blackwood Forest." The name hit a switch somewhere deep inside me. Blackwood Forest. For a second, the image wasn't of the dusty kitchen, but of something else. Towering trees, so thick their canopies blocked out the sun even at midday. A silence that wasn't just the absence of noise, but a presence, something watching. My breath caught in my throat. My hand, which had been resting on my briefcase, tightened its grip. The leather squeaked. What the hell was that? I shook my head, a tiny, almost imperceptible motion. It's just a damn forest, a collection of trees and dirt where kids used to get lost. Logic, Riley, get a grip. "Right," I said, my voice a little too sharp. "The forest. Let's look at those old deeds." He pushed a stack of brittle, folded documents toward me. For the next hour, I waded through a swamp of legal jargon from the 1920s, my brain numbing from the sheer boredom of it all. Property lines described by the old oak struck by lightning in '08 and the edge of Miller's Creek before it dried up. It was a nightmare. But then I saw it. Tucked inside a deed from 1954 was a hand-drawn map, sketched on the back of the parchment. It was rough, detailing Peterson's property line with a thick, uneven charcoal line. Most of it was unremarkable, except for a small, spidery script in the bottom corner, written in a different hand with different ink. It looked like a note someone had scribbled as an afterthought, something that had nothing to do with property law. It said, "Don't follow the calls." I stared at it. The words seemed to vibrate on the page. Calls? What calls? It was so out of place, so bizarre. Some surveyor's idea of a joke? A warning to keep kids from wandering off? My logical mind churned, trying to file it away, to categorize it as irrelevant data. A small, dry laugh escaped my lips. Peterson looked up from his newspaper. "What's so funny?" "Nothing," I said, folding the map carefully. "Just an odd note here. Probably some old town prank." I pulled out my phone. The slick, cold glass felt like an anchor to my world, the real world in Chicago. I flattened the map, angled the phone to avoid the glare from the overhead light, and snapped a picture. Just in case. You never know. Maybe it could be a fun little anecdote to tell the guys back at the office. A weird piece of local folklore found while eating my spoonful of shit. Nothing more. To get to the bottom of a century of bad paperwork, you have to talk to the people who were there, or the next best thing. I figured, in a town like Harmony Creek, the chief of police was probably the closest thing to a living historical archive. Talking to a washed-up old cop, I muttered to my reflection in the car's rearview mirror. Could this get any more exciting? The police station was just 2 rooms in the town hall building. It smelled like burnt coffee and wet wool. Chief Davies looked exactly like the place smelled. He was a big man, gone soft around the middle, with a face full of broken blood vessels and a tired kindness in his eyes. He sat behind a dented metal desk that looked like it had lost a fight with a suspect, or maybe several. "Alex Riley," he said, extending a hand that swallowed mine. His grip was firm. "Didn't think I'd see you back here. Heard you were a big-shot lawyer in the city." "Just an associate, Chief," I said, pulling out my professional smile. "And it's mostly just paperwork." "Well, you came to the right place for that," he chuckled, gesturing to the stacks of files threatening to overwhelm his desk. "What can I do for Sterling and Locke?" I laid out the basics of Peterson's case, the disputed fence line, the ambiguous deeds. Davies listened, nodding slowly, his gaze drifting towards the window that looked out onto the town square. "Ah, that piece of land," he said when I finished. "Always trouble, that spot, right up against Blackwood." There it was again, that name. A cold little knot formed in my stomach. I leaned forward, forcing a casual tone. "Yeah, speaking of old town business, I was just a kid, but I remember there was a big search in that forest once, for a girl." Davy's expression changed. The tired kindness folded in on itself, replaced by something heavier. "Sarah Jenkins," he said. The name just hung in the air between us. 15 years ago this fall. "I remember the suspect was some homeless guy," I prompted, watching his face. I needed to hear it from him. I needed the official story to match mine. It was like checking a box. Yes, my carefully constructed reality is correct. Proceed. He sighed, a long, rattling sound. "Yeah, old man Hemlock. Lived out in the woods. Not all there, you know. He was our only real lead." Davies leaned back, his chair groaning in protest. "But here's the thing that always bothered me, Alex, the thing that kept me up some nights." He paused, looking at me. "We combed every inch of that forest for a week. Dogs, volunteers from 3 counties, the whole show. We found the spot where the kids were playing. We found Sarah's little hair ribbon caught on a bush. But we never found a single trace of Hemlock anywhere near there. Not one footprint that matched his worn-out boots. Not a thread from that ratty old coat he always wore. It was like the man was a ghost, vanished from the area the same day she did." My mind immediately supplied the answer. Incompetence, that's what it was. Small-town cops missing the obvious. "So you never found him?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "Nope. Case went cold. We all just assumed. It was easier to assume Hemlock grabbed her and ran for good." He looked me straight in the eye. Easier than the alternative, anyway. I left the station with a file of old property complaints and a faint, buzzing annoyance. Davies and his small-town mysteries. The logical explanation was always the simplest. Hemlock was crazy and unpredictable. He knew the woods better than anyone. Of course he could avoid a bunch of volunteer firefighters tromping around. Case closed. That night, in the squeaky bed of the Harmony Creek Motel, the dream came. It had been years. Years. I thought I had buried it for good, paved over it with case law and ambition. But there it was. I was standing at the edge of Blackwood Forest again, only I wasn't 10. I was me, now, in the suit I'd worn to Peterson's house. The air was cool, smelling of damp earth and decay. But there were no sounds, no birds, no wind in the leaves, nothing. And it was there, between two ancient oaks. The shape. Tall, thin, wrapped in something dark and ragged. It was exactly as I remembered it from my childhood, a perfect high-definition recreation. But this time was different. This time I didn't run. I couldn't. My feet were rooted to the ground, my expensive leather shoes sinking into the soft soil. I just stood there and watched it. And it just stood there. It wasn't a man hiding. It wasn't a predator waiting to strike. It was just there, like a tree that had grown in the shape of a person. It didn't move. It didn't breathe. I could feel it. I could feel the complete and utter lack of life coming from it, a void in the middle of the woods. My 10-year-old mind had filled in the blanks, had given it a face and a name, Old Man Hemlock. But looking at it now, as an adult, it had no face. It had nothing. It was just a shape of a man that wasn't a man. I woke up with a gasp, kicking the thin motel blanket onto the floor. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. The room was dark, the only light a sickly orange glow from the parking lot seeping through the cheap curtains. My hand was shaking. I held it up in front of my face, watching the tremor. "Jesus Christ," I whispered. My throat was dry. I swung my legs out of bed and sat on the edge, head in my hands. The logical part of my brain, my shield and my sword, kicked into gear. It's stress. You're back in a place you hate, working a case you despise. You heard the name, saw the forest. Of course you had a nightmare. It's a textbook psychological response. It made perfect sense. And yet, the feeling from the dream lingered. That profound stillness. That sense of something fundamentally wrong. Fuck this. The next morning, I decided I needed to see the damned fence for myself. You can't argue about a boundary line you haven't walked. It was a perfect excuse, a logical, lawyerly reason to go back to that place. I drove to Peterson's property and parked. He wasn't home. Good. I walked around the side of his house, through the overgrown grass, until I reached the back of the lot. There it was, a line of rusted barbed wire strung between rotting wooden posts. On my side, Peterson's unmowed lawn. On the other side, the forest. Blackwood. It was just as I remembered, just as it was in the dream. The trees were huge, their branches interlocking overhead to form a dense, dark ceiling. Sunlight struggled to get through, dappling the forest floor in shifting patterns of green and black. It was quiet, so quiet. The sounds of the distant highway, the hum of the town, they all just stopped right here at this wire fence, as if they were afraid to go any further. I stood there for a long time, just looking, trying to connect the place to the memory, to the dream. I looked over to the right, towards a thicket of younger, denser trees. That's where she'd hidden. I knew it, a certainty that went deeper than memory. She'd counted to 100 and crammed herself into that little hollow, giggling. And then, the feeling started. It began as a prickle on the back of my neck, the kind you get when you feel a draft. But it wasn't a draft. The air was heavy, unmoving. The prickling intensified, spreading down my arms, making the fine hairs stand on end. I was being watched. It wasn't a memory. It wasn't a dream. This was happening right now. It was the same feeling as the dream, that focused, unblinking attention. It came from the trees, from the deep shadows between the trunks. My whole body went rigid. Every instinct I had screamed at me to turn around, get in my car, and drive the 6 hours back to Chicago without looking back. But I couldn't. I was Alex Riley, the logical man, the man who didn't believe in ghosts or monsters in the woods. I pulled out my phone. My hands were slick with sweat, and I almost dropped the damned thing. I held it to my ear, forcing myself to speak, my voice coming out louder than I intended, sharp and abrasive in the dead air. "Yeah, Mark, it's Alex," I said to no one. "Listen, about the Harrison deposition, yeah, I'm looking at the site now. It's a joke. Total mess. We'll have it sorted out by tomorrow." I kept talking, spewing legal jargon into the woods, using the words of my world as a weapon against the silence of this one. I talked about motions and discovery and billable hours, a desperate incantation to keep the real world in place, but my eyes stayed fixed on the shadows. Nothing moved, nothing changed, but the feeling didn't go away. It was still there, watching, waiting. Finally, I snapped the phone shut and turned, walking back to my car without letting myself run. My heart hammered against my ribs. Each step felt like I was pulling my feet out of mud. "There's an explanation," I told myself as I fumbled with the car door handle. "There is a perfectly rational explanation for this. A bear, a deer, a trespasser. My mind was just playing tricks on me because of the stress and the bad memories. It had to be." But as I drove away, a single cold thought cut through the wall of logic I had built so carefully around myself. A tiny crack had appeared in the foundation. What if there isn't? The drive from Peterson's property back into town was a blur. I don't remember it. My mind was just a loop of those dark trees and that goddamn feeling of being on a slide under a microscope. By the time I was back in the motel parking lot, my shirt was stuck to my back with sweat, and the AC was blasting on high. There's an explanation. There's always an explanation. I needed to work. I needed to bury myself in something solid, something with clauses and precedents and page numbers. I spread the Peterson files out on the cheap motel desk. The maps, the deeds, the surveys, it was a mess. A century of handshake deals and sloppy record-keeping. Peterson's hand-drawn map, the one his grandfather supposedly made, showed the property line extending a good 20 feet further into the woods than the official survey filed with the town in 1978. A classic he said, she said. Except in this case, it was he said, dusty old document said. And the dusty old document was going to win unless I could find an older, dustier document to contradict it. The town archives, of course, another thrilling excursion into the beating heart of Harmony Creek. The archives were in the basement of the library, a small brick building next to the town hall. The air down there was cool and dry, and it smelled exactly like you'd expect: old paper, bookbinding glue, and a hint of lemon polish. A woman with a cloud of white hair and glasses on a chain around her neck looked up from a massive ledger book as I came down the stairs. "Well, hello there," she said, her voice warm and a little crackly, like a favorite old record. "You're not from around here." "Alex Riley," I said, giving her the junior associate smile. "I'm a lawyer working on a property dispute for Mr. Peterson." "Oh, old Carl," she chirped, standing up. She was shorter than I thought, and moved with a surprising quickness. A bit of a grizzly bear, that one, but his heart's in the right place. "I'm Evelyn Gable. Everyone calls me Evie." She wiped a hand on her floral apron before shaking mine. "Now, what kind of trouble has Carl gotten himself into this time?" This was Mrs. Gable, the town's living memory. I laid out the problem with the conflicting surveys. She listened patiently, nodding, her head tilted like a curious bird. "Ah, the Blackwood line," she said, like it was an old friend. "Yes, that's always been a tricky one. The original plots from before the logging company went under were optimistic, let's say. Come on, I think I know just the plat book you need." She led me between towering shelves of leather-bound books and cardboard boxes tied with string. It was completely, blessedly boring. This was my world. Paper, facts, logic. The prickling on my neck from the forest finally started to fade. "Here we are," she said, pulling a massive, heavy book from a low shelf with a grunt. "Township Surveys, 1920 to 1940. Let's see what the original deed says." She found what I needed in minutes, a brittle, yellowed map with spidery ink handwriting. She handled it with the care of a surgeon. While she took it over to a rickety-looking photocopier, I leaned against a table, trying to look relaxed, trying to be the friendly city lawyer. I needed to make small talk. "You know," I began, my voice sounding fake even to my own ears, "that land, right up against the woods, it brings back some memories, not great ones." She paused, her hand hovering over the copier button. "Oh? Yeah, I was a kid here when that girl went missing, Sarah Jenkins." I said her name. It felt strange in my mouth, like a word from a different language. I remember they thought it was that homeless man who lived out there, the crazy one. I was just reciting the facts, the official story, my story. It was easy, comfortable. "Hemlock," I added. "That was his name, right?" Mrs. Gable turned away from the copier. She looked at me, really looked at me, and the cheerful, chattering librarian was gone. The crinkles around her eyes softened, but not with a smile. It was something else. Pity. She set the old map down gently on a nearby table. The sound of the paper sliding against the wood was loud in the quiet room. "Hemlock," she said, and her voice was so soft, so full of a sadness that felt ancient. Oh, that poor, poor boy. He couldn't have hurt a fly. My professional smile felt like it was cracking on my face. A weird buzzing started in my ears. "What do you mean? The police, everyone, they said he was the main suspect, that he was dangerous." She shook her head slowly, a deep, sorrowful motion. She picked up a little tin from her desk, opened it, and offered me a cookie. I didn't take one. "The police needed someone to blame, dear. People were terrified. It's easier to be afraid of a person you can imagine than something else." She looked away for a moment, towards the small basement window that showed nothing but a slice of green grass. Poor Thomas Hemlock. People called him crazy because he'd talk to himself, but he was just lonely. He was born right here in Harmony Creek. My mother helped deliver him. She looked back at me, her eyes clear and certain, and she delivered the final sentence, the one that broke everything. It was such a tragedy. From the day he was born, the poor thing couldn't see a thing. His eyes never worked. The buzzing in my ears got louder. It felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. Blind since the day he was born. My hand, the one I had resting on the table, felt cold. I could feel the blood draining out of it. The scent of old paper and lemon polish was gone. All I could smell was damp earth. All I could hear was the frantic, hammering beat of my own heart. Mrs. Gable was still talking, her voice a distant murmur. Something about how he used a stick to get around, how he could navigate the woods by sound and touch better than anyone with two good eyes. But I wasn't listening. My brain was stuck. It was trying to force a piece of a puzzle into a space where it didn't fit. The memory. The one I had locked down, defined, and filed away for 15 years. It wasn't a vague impression anymore. It was playing in my head in perfect, crystal clear detail. Me, 10 years old, peeking through the leaves. The clearing, the thicket of trees where Sarah was hiding. And the shape. The tall, thin shape in the ragged coat, standing perfectly still, not moving, not making a sound. And it was staring. I knew it then, and I knew it now. It wasn't just facing her direction. It was staring. Its attention was fixed on that exact spot, that little hollow where she was crammed, trying not to giggle. I had felt its focus, a focused, predatory stillness, the way a heron stares at the water, waiting for a fish. A blind man doesn't stare. A blind man doesn't lock his gaze onto a hidden target. The entire foundation of my adult life, the logical, explainable pillar I had built to hold up the ceiling of my sanity, just shattered. It turned to dust and blew away. Old Man Hemlock wasn't some crazed killer. He was just a blind man who got caught up in a town's panic. The neat, tidy box I had put the monster in for 15 years was empty, which meant the monster was still out there, which meant the thing I saw in the woods that day, the thing standing there watching her, it wasn't a man. It wasn't human at all. I must have made some kind of noise because Mrs. Abel stopped talking. "Dear, are you all right? You've gone as white as a sheet." I couldn't answer. I couldn't move. My mind was racing, screaming, trying to find a new explanation, a new box to put this in, but there wasn't one. There was only the cold, gut-wrenching certainty that was spreading through me like ice in my veins. You see what I'm saying, right? You get it, don't you? If it wasn't Hemlock, then what the hell was it? What the hell was that thing that took Sarah?